Hello again, and a very warm welcome back to our little podcast, Sweet Omagh Town Internet Radio. I'm Don McGurgan, and across from me is the one and only Mr. Declan Ford.
Yes, and tonight's podcast, Donald, is
Kieran McGlinn talking to Tom Sweeney about the songwriting and music of the late and great Felix Kearney.
So, take it away, Tom and Kieran.
Well, hello friends, and a very warm welcome to Sweet Omagh Town, a podcast normally presented by the redoubtable Declan Ford and also Don McGurgan. If you noticed a change in the voice, it's because I'm neither Don nor Declan. My name is Tom Sweeney, and I am, suppose, what you might call an interloper this evening, because I've been asked by the lads to come and talk to a man who certainly needs no introduction to around this part of the world. When you mention traditional or folk music around the Omagh area, there are certain families come to mind, and probably top of the heap would be the Kearneys and the McGlinns and the offshoots of that family and that extended family. And I'm delighted to be joined by Kieran McGlinn, an old friend of mine and a great ballad singer and composer himself. Kieran, of course, is a grandson of the legendary Felix Kearney, who we're going to be featuring on the programme tonight. Kieran, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Kieran, we know that a number of years ago you produced what I think was quite a phenomenal recording. As a matter of fact, I reviewed it for the papers. Songs of your grandfather's called The Misty Hills of Home. Now, Felix Kearney was a brilliant man, an erudite, intelligent, well-read man. Can you tell us about his early life, Kieran?
I can. Well, Felix was born in the townland of Maharinny, about 2 miles from Drumcone, on the slopes of the Pigeon Top. He went to the National School in Drumcone village until he was 9. And then home demands made it imperative that he pack up the education and go home and work herding cattle to sales and so on until he was fit enough and strong enough to work in the fields. And that more or less was his life until he reached manhood. He was hired in farms all around County Tyrone and further afield. He was, we know for a fact that in the 1911 census he was hired to a farmer called Marshall who lived near to Lochmuck. And it's thought that during that time that he was with that particular farmer, he wrote Rainy Day, which possibly was one of his first compositions.
How many were his family, Kieran? He was one of how many children?
He was one of, there was him as the only son, and he had 2 sisters, and then there was half sisters and half, brothers. Charlie Kearney of Dewich was a half brother. Detta McNabb of Dewich was a half sister. And then he had 2 other sisters who moved away from the area quite early, so he seldom saw them.
Was Felix the eldest?
Felix was the eldest, yes, he was the eldest.
Now, in those days, Kieran, anyone who's read the books of Patrick McGill or even heard some of the songs of your grandfather would know that a lot of young people were hired out.
Yeah.
They used to, people especially from Donegal, they would see them walking to the fair at Omagh.
Yeah.
Or the fair at Strabane. They called them the poor Donegals.
Yeah.
Your grandfather was also hired out at a very young age, Kieran.
Well, he was the poor Tyrone. He was hired out from his mid-teens. He was being hired, as I say, all around the farms in Tyrone and further afield. And then eventually he married Sophia McCaffrey. And he was finding it hard he could work, so he went to Scotland, where he worked around the Glasgow Renfrew area. He worked for a while as a miner, but he was also hired on estates around that area until eventually, in I think it was 1914, he was conscripted into the army for the First World War, and he served in France and Belgium, and he was, I think I got it out of him one time that he was a sniper, but it was all very close, very little. He was wounded in France And I remember him showing me one time when I used to call down to see him at 32 Cannondale and try to get as much information out of him as I could, which was very difficult. But he showed me his upper arm where the bullet went through, and it was more or less just a nice hole about the size of a duck egg in his upper arm muscle. So he came back from he worked then when he was sort of invalided out. He worked for a while in the officers' mess as a cook and general sort of.
Was this at home here in Omagh, was it?
No, this before he actually was invalided out of the army.
Okay.
But then when he came back here, he went at farm labouring again. There was a rumour that he was actually offered the job as a postman, as ex-military men in those days were, but he decided that there was somebody that he knew was better qualified for the job, and he didn't take it. And he kept at the farm labouring.
Yeah.
So that was the type of guy he was.
Relics of old decency.
The old decency, is right.
Exactly. Kieran, back to the hiring. How would the hiring work? Where would he have gone to a hiring fair?
He would have went to he went to hiring fairs, yeah.
In Omagh?
In Omagh, and actually you mentioned Strabane as well. As far as I can make out, he went to Strabane too.
And what would they be hired for the harvest?
They were hired for all sorts of farm work, farm labouring and so on. When he was in the one in Marshalls, I think, he told me a story which I don't know, it was a ghost story, that he was living in the Marshall farmhouse in the attic. He was allowed to live in the attic, but you'd notice in the song Rainy Day that the relationship was worker and master. He called the man he worked for master, and it was that sort of slave. You know, the master and the slave.
Yeah,
that's basically what it was. You know, he was working for a pittance, and he did anything he was asked for. You know, so it was in that particular wee song as well, which I think was one of his first. He would say, into the stable first I went to let me pipe and smoke content, but he had to watch out in case his master seen him. He always get him something to do.
Oh.
You know, so he
wouldn't want it to be idle.
No, he wouldn't allowed to walk around the street. You know, he'd always get a job.
Get the last penny worth out of him, in a sense. Yeah. So then when he was he hired in Scotland before he went to work in the, as a worker? Was he a young boy in Scotland?
He wasn't in Scotland until, as far as I can make out, he wasn't in Scotland until after 1911.
So he was in his 20s.
He was in his 20s when he was in Scotland. He was already married to Sophia at the time that they went to Scotland, just to get work.
Mm-hmm.
So, no, not as a teenager. He wasn't in Scotland. No.
Oh, you figure he worked as a miner? He did. He
worked as a miner in Scotland, around the Renfrew area. Patrick McGill was in another part of Scotland, which is why they never met up in Scotland. They tried, or Felix tried on several occasions to meet up with Patrick McGill, but it never came off.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, you didn't sort of jump on a bus and go out and see your friend who was in a different country. You know, just didn't happen, especially in the circumstances they were in.
Uh-huh.
Dire poverty.
Well, just to mention them for our listeners, Patrick McGill, of course, was he was known as the Navy poet. He came from the Rosses area of Donegal. He was hired out at the age of 7.
Yeah.
And they used to walk barefoot all the way from Gweedore to Strabane. And he's written 2 great books, of course. One is called The Rat Pit, and the other is called Children of the Dead End. So Patrick and Felix, in that sense, were parallel at the same time, hired out in Scotland. And when he was in Scotland, he was conscripted then, Kieran?
He was conscripted into the Cameron Highlanders, was the regiment that he joined. And he was obviously then sent to France, and where he fought in France. But he never, and I couldn't get any news from him at all about what he did, what he saw. And I think everybody would agree that the vast majority of ex-servicemen are the same. They don't want to mention what they did, what they saw, or whatever. There's one photograph of him and 2 of his friends in the services. There's 3 of them together. I have a copy of it in the house somewhere. But for the photograph, they swapped uniforms, so that he is in the photograph of a Canadian, or he's in the uniform of a Canadian.
Oh.
The Canadian guy is in the uniform of the Cameron Highlanders. So there was still a sense of humour with these guys, even though they were.
Yeah.
You know.
I suppose too, when you think about that, those men coming back from the Great War, coming back to Ireland. Ireland had changed.
Yeah, of course.
Yeats says changed utterly.
Yeah.
And, the men who came back from the war were almost looked down upon by the nationalist community because here they were serving the empire when they maybe should have been fighting in Dublin or whatever,
Yeah. Well,
so I think a lot of the men perhaps didn't talk about it because of that, in a sense.
Yeah, well, he actually did mention that he was, he had a cousin called Owen Rowe, who is one of the people in a statue in Perigo, right?
Absolutely.
And he was my grandfather. I know for this is a fact that he was always more or less ashamed that he had joined the British Army rather than been home along with Owen.
He felt that all along.
He did feel that.
All of his life, maybe.
All of his life, I think, yeah. He did mention it in one of the poems that isn't included, obviously. It wasn't the sort of thing you'd put an air to, but he definitely thought that he should have been along with your man, who was a cousin. So
I heard that before. That statue right in the square at
Right in
Perigo
the-
with
right in
the
the
man
middle.
with the hat back ways and that.
exactly.
That's in honour of Owen Rowe, is it?
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
dad, your grandfather's cousin.
Yeah,
Oh, my word.
he was a cousin apparently, but he went from there and just went on into when he got back home. He just went on into the farm labour,
I heard a very interesting thing. I watched it in preparation for this. I watched a DVD the other evening. It might have been produced by, I'm not sure, the Drumquin Historical Society or someone like that.
Yeah,
But they interview your aunt, Rosaline McCullough.
yeah,
She made a very telling point, I thought. I wasn't sure if Felix actually played an instrument, but she said when they were young, around the house on the mountain, he played the chanter.
yeah.
She said he also had a Scots bagpipe chanter,
Yes.
and he would play it round the house. And she wasn't quite sure, but she thought he may have been a piper in the army.
Yeah, well, you see, these things, he wasn't an easy man to get information from. I mean, he could well have been, but he did. I think he made attempts as well at the fiddle. I mean, Arthur Kearney played fiddle,
Yes.
although it was very hard to get any instances of Arthur playing the fiddle.
Oh, yeah.
But he could well have. There was always music and poetry and stuff about the Mountain House, as it was called, the house that they settled in Cavanagh. It was the last house. After the Mountain House, there was heather, that was it. There was no, even the lane didn't go any further, it was just the end of the road. But there was once, we lived in Botira, which was on over past the Mountain House, close to where the McKinley enclave of farms were situated. And I remember as clear as day, once I came into Omagh to live in Cannondale when I was 9, and when I was 8 or 9, I remember my mother taking me over the few miles to the Mountain House to recite the will, and this Feely, my grandfather, sat me up in the bottom half of the dresser, and that is where I recited the will for him to hear. And talk about being proud, I knew it off.
And you knew it off by heart. It's a
heart.
long recitation.
And there's a long recitation. I'm now old man, I'm crabbit and
That's
trans.
right.
So he was all delighted that I knew his poem. He thought that people wouldn't even be bothered with them. Like the time that he was talking to, it might have been David Hammond, I think, we talked about for a BBC thing. And David Hammond mentioned, I think maybe Michael Longley might have been involved in this as well. Mentioned what was this? Oh, what was it now? Dressix Heathery Braes maybe, and said that it was a very they would like to hear him sing a bit of that. He actually sang on this tape, which I've lost. He actually sang a bit, which was a rare thing to get him singing. But David Hammond said, I remember, he says to him, a lot of people thought that was a very good poem, Felix. And Felix says, I hear that. He says, I didn't think a pile about it myself. You couldn't even compliment him.
He was a modest man.
He was very, very modest.
Unbelievable. I think we'll stop for a song here, Kieran. And I think the first song we're going to listen to is a beautiful song, again, off your CD of your grandfather's songs. The CD is called The Misty Hills of Home. This is a beautiful song. It's called The Dancing in Glenroan. Can you tell us something about it, Kieran?
Well, that particular song, Dancing in Glenroan, is one of the things that my grandfather did repeatedly, and he often used it in his songs, was the longing for home. And he spent time in Scotland, he spent time in France, and so on. And a lot of his songs are to do with the exile, and the exile's missing of the green hills of Tyrone, and the customs and pastimes of the people in Tyrone, especially Tyrone, and especially West Tyrone. And the dancing in Glenroan, there's arguments about this. People around Plum Bridge were saying that Glenroan is down that way between South Derry and Plum Bridge. But then again, people in Drumquin would tell you it's between Drumore and Drumquin, so I would say that's the more likely one.
Yeah.
It'd be somewhere around Charlie Kearney's pub, I would say, Glenroan. If it wouldn't be 2 miles away from there, like. But that's about all I would know about it, to tell you the truth, except that it's a beautiful song. And I think, as far as the lyrics are concerned, it's one of his finest.
Well, I have to tell you that I love the album, I really do, and I think work.
That's one person.
I think not, and I think also the work done producing the record and also playing on it by Eamon Michael Holm is superb as well.
Oh well, there was one time when that song, the particular song, the Dancing in Glenroan, I went into Eamon's house to have a bit of lunch, and Eamon was staying in the studio outside the back of his house, and he stayed there and he was working away and doing whatever he does. And I came out again and he says, sit up in that seat there, Kieran, like Dawn is sitting there. He says, sit up in that and put the headphones on. So I sat up in this, and this started, and honest, I could feel the hairs in the back of my neck going, and it was the cello and the piano introduction that he did in half an hour, and it was absolutely perfection. And every time I hear the song now and listen to him doing that, I sort of forget about everything else except the introduction that Eamon did.
Well, that's nice tribute to Eamon, but I have to say now the vocal, I think, is absolutely fantastic. So this is Kieran McGlinn singing his grandfather Felix Kearney's beautiful song, The Dancing in Glenroan.
By the turf fire brightly gleaming, I am sitting idly dreaming, for 'tis pleasant to recall again the joys that we have known. And I find upon reflection that my fondest recollection is the fiddler's lilting music and the dancing in Glenroan. Every jig and reel I mind them, in my memory I can find them, bringing back the scenes of childhood and the joys that long have flown. Though I'm growing old and weary, still my heart is never dreary, when I dream the dream that brings me back, the dancing in Glenroan. Sure, the colleens were the sweetest, and their dancing was the neatest. You wouldn't find their equal in the valleys of Tyrone. And the lads were right and steady, you could always find them ready, with a falcha for the stranger to the dancing in Glenroan. While sitting here I ponder, till my heart is filled with wonder, why we ever leave such pleasure for a world so cold and lone. And I wish I were returning to begin again life's morning, but dreamland only brings me back, the dancing in Glenroan. outside the snow is falling, ever more and more recalling to my memory the long ago and joys that I have known. And my kindest thoughts are going with the breezes that are blowing to drop each snowflake gently on that hillside in Glenroan. And though time for me's advancing, don't I know there are youngsters dancing in some cottage by the glenside where tonight my thoughts have flown. And that joy may I betide them, and the light of heaven guide them, for Ireland will be Irish while there's dancing in Glenroan. Ireland will be Irish while there's dancing in Glenroan.
That was the most beautiful rendition of Felix Kearney's song, The Dancing in Glenroan, sung by his grandson Kieran and accompanied there beautifully by Eamon McElhone. Another thing, I was going to ask you about extant. Are there any extant recordings of your grandfather available to the public?
Of him actually speaking or
singing?
The only one that I knew of or know of that I've heard was one that David Hammond did with him many years ago, and it was for some programme for the BBC, Tom, the name of which I forget. But my Aunt Rita Hines had a copy of it, reel to reel, which I discovered in a drawer in Rita's flat in Cannondale, and I asked for a loan of it. So I took it and I had it in the house, but like an awful lot of other things that I had in my house, Artie got his hands on it, and Artie took it to Cork, and that was the last seen of it. So I know that he was on that, and he did sing a wee blurt of a song on it, but I mean that was the only one that I know of. I think you might get they must have a copy of BBC somewhere. But
we'll have to ask Don McGurgan here. Don has the in with the BBC. Maybe you can find that out, John, if they have the archive recording of Davy Hammond talking to Felix. And I was going to ask you, when you were a young fellow and your siblings, would your grandfather have sang much when you were around his house or anything?
No, absolutely not. He would have, if he wasn't working in the back garden in Cannondale, he was reading, and he read vociferously. He read everything he could get his hands on. And I remember when I was at art college, I came home one weekend, proud as punch, with a copy of James Joyce's Dubliners with me. Oh. So I thought, I'll take this down to Grandad, and he'll love this here because he'll think it's great. So I took it down to 32 Cannondale, where he lived, and within an hour he was back up to my house, 59, with it, saying, he says, you keep that as rubbish. He was absolutely mad about Zane Grey, about Patrick McGill's novels. He read and read and read, but he kept getting books out of the library, and every book he borrowed from the library, in the flyleaf top right hand corner he put a wee dot of a pencil, and that was to let him know that he'd read it before. Just one tiny dot on the flyleaf, and that was Felix's sort of mark that I've read this, you know.
I always compare your grandfather with the poet Francis Ledwidge.
Yeah.
Because I think Felix Kearney was to Tyrone what Francis Ledwidge was to Meath.
Yeah.
That longing for home.
Yeah.
All the poetry and songs of praise of his native place, and the fact that they both served in the First World War. Yeah. And came back, and while they were both probably ardent nationalists, I think Ledwidge joined the army because I suppose they were talking about those days of freedom of small nations. Yes. When the Germans invaded Belgium and so forth. And even that may have encouraged people like your grandfather to feel they were doing something worthwhile in joining the army back then, you know. Well, tell me this, Kieran, your grandfather, do you know of, apart from Zane Grey, are there any other influences that you know of in his reading? Which was very wide, obviously.
Obviously, he read everything, and again, I mean, the house in Cannondale was just full of books, but they were mostly, you know, like Riders of the Purple Sage and stuff like this. You know, they were. I mean. And then, obviously, he was interested in reading Irish history, very interested in that. And there was a few things that he wrote were fairly politically minded, you know. But some of them were in the wee book that was published by the Ulster Herald years and years ago for 2 and 6.
Yeah.
But a copy of which now is almost impossible to find unless you're in America or Australia or somewhere. But around here, if you have one, treasure it, because I haven't got one. I had one for years and I lost it. He ended up giving away all the copies he had. He had copies in the house, but people called looking for the Atlanta one, and he gave it out. Never saw it again. Like a lot of these stuff that he wrote in exercises books. He wrote on the back of cigarette packets. He wrote on the back of envelopes, and he lost dozens of things. And there was he loaned things to people, never returned, and he forgot them. And there would be more material that was never published than what is published to this day. Like,
that's just incredible, isn't it?
you know. And obviously there was never any royalties. That was
Copyright didn't exist.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There was one person who I know recorded one of his songs, was a girl from South Derry, whose name escapes me now. But she did make a lovely recording of, I think it was Dressix Heathery Blaze.
So Gemma Hassan, no?
That was Gemma Hassan. Thank you, Tom. It was indeed Gemma Hassan. She recorded one of his songs. But there was things included. David Hammond recorded the Hills Above Drumquon on Artie's record. And I think he might have done another couple of things. But there was never even... I don't think he was ever even credited with having written them, never mind being paid for them.
You're right. I mean, there are certain books done by the Mercier Press in Cork back in the 1960s. 4 different books of Irish ballads, and at least there are 2 Felix Kearney songs in them credited as traditional. But you know, the thing is about Felix Kearney songs is this. If you heard a Felix Kearney song, it sounds traditional.
It does, yeah.
I mean, Felix may have written them today, but they sound like they could have been sung 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So maybe when people were recording them, they thought this is an old
They probably did.
traditional ballad, whereas in fact he'd actually written them.
Well, I'll tell you, because it must run in families, because just last week or the week before, my son Matt, who you know is a musician, and he plays weddings and things with various people, but he was telling me he was playing with this girl, and part of her program is playing the fiddle. And she was doing this march, and Matt says, I find it very hard to get the right accompaniment on guitar for a march, whereas a piano, you've got the old vamp going. The guitar is it's very difficult to get the right hand action for a march. And I says, it is. I says, it's an awkward one. And I says, what was the march? He says, I can't remember it now, but it was called the Centenary March.
Oh my God.
Oh, I says, oh, right. I says, do you know anything about the history of that, Matt? No. He says, I think it was the Kilfenora Cayley Band that wrote it. I says, no, you think wrong. It was Arthur Kearney that wrote it. On his moving into Centenary Park, him and the family moved into Centenary Park when it opened, and he wrote that song. And he was
a great march.
Never credited with it. Never ever put down to Arthur
And every
Kearney.
band in the world plays that now, you know.
Oh, aye, I says, Matt, it's been done by marching bands, by pipe bands, by Cayley bands. You know, I remember seeing the Pride of Aaron Cayley band playing it, and Arthur was in the band, and he still wasn't credited with it. You know, but again, it sounded so traditional. It still sounds, yeah.
That's a beautiful
It's a
tune.
good march, yeah. But you can see the difficulty there. If you imagine playing the guitar when you're doing that,
Yeah. Oh, particularly the right hand.
and the right hand would be
Yeah.
just a nightmare. Like,
Yeah.
you need to play it double time or something.
But even talking about your grandfather's songs, what amazes me is this: not just was he a lovely lyricist, but to William Carton, the Tyrone novelist, once said, unless the words fit the tune, or vice versa, the song becomes like a fighting man and wife. And you know, your grandfather always seemed to me to wed the perfect melody to the words he had written, and that is
Yeah.
a big art on its own.
Yeah. He always did have. Now, a lot of the melodies, as you know, Tom, were traditional melodies, but it was almost as if he was thinking of the melody when he was writing the lyrics. You know,
Aye.
I don't know if that's true or not, but it was almost as if he had this thing in the back of his head.
Aye.
I'll write a song to that.
Yeah, but the thing was, he knew
Yeah.
the music.
No, he knew the music. And,
Now,
wow.
here Rosaline McCullough saying as well that when Arthur and your mum and I were young on the mountain, there was a family called McCullough, nothing to do with her McCulloughs, who lived nearby, and they were musicians.
Yeah.
And she said that your grandfather, a lot of the tunes he actually used, he would have heard from this McCullough family who
Right.
lived on the mountain too.
Right.
And Rosaline says that her and your granny, her mother, if Philly put a tune to a song, they would say, that's one of the McCullough tunes. because this is Rosaline talking.
Yeah, of course.
But I always thought that he had a great way of wedding a lyric
Yeah.
and a melody.
Yeah.
Talking of which, I think it's time for some more music. Kieran, you've chosen as your second track, again, a song which I think is so beautiful. It's called The Whispering River Stroll. Can
Yeah.
you tell us about that?
Well, I'll tell you, again, according to my aunt Rita, he was in Dilly McMahon's pub in John Street, which he would have gone to quite frequently. And there was a crowd of local guys in the pub, and they knew who he was, obviously, Felix Kearney. And he said, Philly, why is it that you keep writing about Drumcon and Drumore and all these towns and you never mention Omagh? And he went home and he wrote The Whispering River Stroll.
Is that right?
And the next time he went in, apparently he was able to sing The Whispering River Stroll. The other sort of thing about it was that this is a lovely song.
Oh, it's
And
beautiful.
again, it's not a melody you'd hear every day of the week. You know,
But did he compose that melody? 'Cause I'd never heard it
I
before.
don't. I'm not sure if I don't know if it'd been used in any other song.
I never heard it before.
But the other thing was that he was told once that he was wrong in his detail of the song, that he mentioned the Whispering River Stroll, and part of the lyrics mentions the lovers' retreat where fond sweethearts still meet by the Whispering River Stroll, and the lovers' retreat, for locals will know, is not on the Stroll at all. Actually, it's, no, what is it on? But
Come on, is it?
The Kimon, it's on the Kimon, and it doesn't become the Stroll until it reaches Omagh and joins up with the Drumra. But he says, have you never heard a poetic license?
Good
So
for him.
that was it. But people find wee niggly things to complain about, as you do.
Well, it's great. It's a most beautiful song.
It's lovely, yeah.
This is Kieran McGlinn, again, singing one of Felix Kearney, his grandfather's most beautiful songs, again, accompanied by him and Michael Hole. The Whispering River Stroll.
I was dreaming last night of a distant land, that emerald isle so fair, with her mist-clouded valleys and mountains grand, that gem so rich and rare. Though 'tis only in fancy I wander again by those tree-shaded streams, I crave not for wealth, if by day I have health, and at night time happy dreams. Leave me a memory of Ireland, of springtime in County Tyrone, or the mist over moorland and mireland, and a cottage that once was my own. Let me picture the old town of Omagh, where I as a boy went to school, and the lovers' retreat where fond sweethearts still meet by the Whispering River Stroll. In dreamland I live o'er the past again, recalling each smile and tear. The scene that I long for each day in vain, by night are always near. The heath-covered slopes of Glenhorgel, when kissed by the sun's parting beams, and the moon's silvery light o'er the woodlands at night, I can see in happy dreams. Leave me a memory of Ireland, of springtime in County Tyrone. Oh, the mist over moorland and mireland, and a cottage that once was my own. Let me picture the old town of Omagh, where I as a boy went to school, and a lover's retreat where fond sweethearts still meet by the whispering river Strool. And a lover's retreat where fond sweethearts still meet by the whispering river Strool.
That was Kieran McGlinn, of course, and that beautiful rendition of a wonderful song, The Whispering River Strool, by the man we were talking about, and that's Kieran's grandfather, Felix. Kieran, your own mum, would your mother and the other girls in the family, would the other men in the family, would they have sang your grandfather's songs as well? Would they have learned them from your grandfather singing them? Or
My mother would have known them from listening to him singing them, yeah. Eileen Kearney, who got married to Tommy Kearney. Eileen was a very good singer of his songs, as indeed was Rosaline. And another sister, Nessa, had a lovely singing voice. And they learned them, obviously, in the Mountain House, from him composing and singing them. And they were all actually quite musical. The boys, obviously, were more obviously sort of put it out there than the girls did. They never, to my knowledge, none of them learned to play an instrument except Arthur and Philly. Philly became a very good fiddler, and Arthur became a fiddler and vocalist, a very good singer, and a very good man for saying recitations, like the Four Farrellys, which he was famous for. Any time that he was about Francie O'Neill's pub in Omagh, he was asked immediately for the Four Farrellys. And as the man says, it wouldn't have been a dry eye in the house when Arthur decided on the Four Farrellys. And it was, he had a great delivery.
Oh, did he? I remember as a young boy, he was in the Omagh Players,
He was, yeah.
And I must have been about 9 or 10, and our teacher, Joe McElhone, was encouraging us to go and see this play. 2 years in a row. The first play was called Paul Twining, and the second play was called Professor Tim, both by the Ballymoney writer George Shields.
Right, oh yeah.
And I remember being bowled over by Arthur's, the timbre of his voice,
yeah,
and the clarity and the strength of his voice. And I got to know him in later years. He was also a great intellectual.
He was, Well, he had a good schooling in Crumlin Road.
He had.
He had very well schooled. He also learned the trade of shoemaker in Crumlin Road, and he learned Irish. And I don't know about the music end of it now, but he did his 5-6 years or whatever it was, and for activities we'll not go into, but he was very he was the type of guy. I used to play guitar with him when I was in my teens. He used to take me with him to sessions in South Derry and Donegal. And the great thing about him, when you went into Donegal with Arthur, you played your chords and he sang his songs. And at the end of the night, he would join the locals speaking Irish. And I always thought, God, I feel so out of it. I just feel how is it that this man here is a joiner and he's able to come down here and talk Irish like a local, and I'm standing here like an idiot, it's not a word. Well, like a couple of words from St. Pat's Secondary School, but you wouldn't even mention them in case somebody started talking Irish to you.
Maybe if you'd done 6 years, you might have, you might have learned it.
Yeah.
And then someone told me, we're talking here about Kieran's uncle Arthur, an absolutely brilliant man who I was so lucky to know as a young boy. Someone told me he also learned how to speak German.
He did learn how to speak
Taught
German.
himself.
Yeah, because there was a thing he wrote. There was a poem he wrote about the mountain house, about going back to looking at the mountain house as a ruin, as a derelict house that was used for keeping cattle in. And he went back and he was sort of saying, and there was a German word in it which I can't remember, but it was very, very convoluted word. And I thought, God, how did he come up with that? And what exactly, I knew what it meant in the context simply because of the context. But I was thinking, and then again, Rita Hines, who was the youngest of the sisters, she told me he taught himself to speak German.
Wow.
So
amazing.
Oh, he was some guy like.
Well, apparently as well, according to Rosalie, that in the old days back in the mountain house, the 3 girls used to love it, and the mother, your grandmother,
Sophia, yeah,
loved it when Felix Senior went playing cards in the evening because the girls could listen to the radio. Because when he was there, he read all the time and they weren't allowed to play the radio.
No, absolutely. He would sit in the armchair with a book and that was it. There was silence. And he read and he read and he would read all night until he went to bed. Therefore, there was no listening to the radio until he decided to go to his bed.
Well, we'll have to give the girls fair play because he also said that when the grandfather left and the 3 girls, at the behest of their mother, would go down to the room and they could sing the latest songs in the most beautiful 3-part harmony.
Yeah, oh yeah. My mother, I remember when we were living in Cannondale, as I say, I was 9 when we moved into it. Artie was 11. And a year later he got his first guitar. But I remember my mother, that would have been in 56, 57, we moved into Cannondale. And my mother started to listen to people like Bill Haley and so on the radio.
From Artie's records.
Yeah.
All right.
But she loved, above all, when it came along, the black groups that danced and sang from the Motown era. And she absolutely had. She says, look at that and listen to that. Isn't that? I mean, this was a woman in her 50s or more who had been reared on Irish music, but she listened, and it was in black and white TV, and she was stuck on it,
And she understood the harmonies.
Oh,
and so
absolutely. Absolutely loved the Motown sound, and
that is absolutely brilliant. Well, Arthur, I think when he did do time, he was along with a man called Paddy Tunney. Another brilliant scholar and balladeer and folklorist. And I remember getting an album. I was very young. The album was called Ireland Her Own.
Right.
It was put out by Topic Records in England. And Arthur sang the most beautiful version of the Song of the Dawn on it. Just beautiful. Paddy Tunney was on it as well. But and Arthur, he was also a great political thinker.
He was,
and he was way ahead of a lot of things, and his political thinking as well.
Yeah.
And his political theory.
He was, yeah. There was I think it was his education. I think came in prison. There was a guy who used to call with us. His name was McGuigan. He used to call with us in Cannondale, and he was a sort of a mystery man. He would just arrive on a bicycle in the middle of the night. And there'd be a knock on the door, and this man McGuigan would come in, very thin, lean man in an overcoat and a cap, and he'd come in and plank himself down on the sofa and start talking. And he was regarded. My father, God rest him, always called him Dr. McGuigan, and he was a great man. He was able to do splices on trees and stuff like this. So whether it was worked or not, he did a couple of things where he grafted one part of a tree onto another in our garden. But we noticed that there was, as children, as teenagers, we noticed that there was a part of his ear missing. The upper part of his ear was totally missing, clean cut. And I mentioned, he knew Arthur obviously. And I mentioned to Arthur, I said, your man was with us last night, Dr. McGuigan. He said, all right, I said, what happened to his ear? He says, that was the cat. And I said, what do you mean? He says, the cat and 9 tails. He got the whip, for he was the biggest troublemaker about Crumlin Road Jail.
For goodness sake.
And he got the whip and it cut the top of his ear off, the cat and 9 tails.
Oh, you remember him?
I remember him, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, God, he was in Cannondale. And then he disappeared just to get on the bike and you wouldn't see him for 3 months. And nobody knew where he came from on the bike, whether
Where
it
he
was,
went to.
or how far he...
The man from God knows where.
He could have been cycling back to Donegal for all I know. Character.
Well, one good story about Arthur and how forward-looking he was as well as knowing his traditional music. I remember 1970, our door got a knock and it was Arthur. And my brother Jimmy and I were very young. He knew we were into ballad singing and so forth. He had a little single record under his arm. Have you a record? You got to hear this here. And he put it on, and it was Planksty.
Yeah.
Singing The Cliffs of Dooneen with uilleann pipes.
Yeah.
And he thought this was the greatest thing he'd ever... He said, this is the future. You know, the way this guy Moore sings this song and the way the pipes are played as accompaniment, he said, this is fantastic. He was proven right. It was absolutely brilliant.
Of course,
and Arthur, one of the first to see it.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then he gave us a song one time, and he wrote, you probably know it better than I do, I was born and reared in Ireland, the land of faith and fame.
Mm-hmm.
And if I am not a gentleman, all Ireland's not to blame. For the devil smiled when I was born and stamped his cloven hoof, and says he, there goes the makings of a cleric or a druth. I laid a trail of broken slates and windows in the school. I played around and wouldn't learn as stupid as a mule. But me days are nearly over, full of grief and pain. So fare thee well, Killavy, I will never sin again. It was a sort of autobiographical song.
Yeah.
I don't think he ever recorded it himself.
Oh, absolutely no chance.
But my brother Jimmy recorded it.
Did he?
In Canada.
God,
you've been needing the royalties now.
Well, Arthur, to my memory, Arthur never recorded anything, Tom. I don't think he ever recorded a song.
Well, that song at the dawn I mentioned earlier on.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know where it was recorded, but I have it in the house. I'll give it to you.
Was that on record, on disc?
It was a vinyl album.
Yeah.
And the album was called Ireland Her Own. Paddy Tunney's on it as well.
Right.
Maybe Maggie Barry might be on it as well.
Right.
It's an old topic recording. Well, look, we talked a lot about Felix Senior. We've talked about the great Arthur. We talked about the 3 girls and the family. What about Felix Junior? My memories of Felix particularly would be with the Pride of Ireland.
The Pride of Ireland, Keely Band, he was one of the founding members, obviously. Himself and the Stork Quinn from Shinera Crossroads in Dromore. Very good fiddler. Great player. Underestimated, I think.
Absolutely.
But Philly went on to win the solo fiddle player, senior fiddle, in the Ulster Fleadh on at least one occasion, if not more. And he always went to the All-Ireland Fleadhs. Never ever missed a year that he was fit to go. He went. I remember one time when I was in my, what would I have been now? Maybe late 20s. I went with Stork Quinn and Philly, the Stork's wife, and my girlfriend Mary, and we went in Frank Quinn's car to Listowel in County Kerry to the All-Ireland Fleadh, and Philly always at the All-Ireland, he never took holidays from the electricity board for which he worked at the time. He never took holidays except to go to the Fleadh, and then it was just a week of just hilarity and music and so on. There was one in that at that same Fleadh in Listowel in County Kerry. It was a lovely sunny morning, and it might have been the Monday or the Tuesday of the Fleadh, which for Fleadh goers in those days would know that is mostly when you heard the good stuff, because the yobs and the hippies had disappeared on the Sunday, and the people who wanted to hear good music stayed on till Tuesday at least. And myself and my girlfriend were walking down the street. We were staying in an attic in a house owned by a Mrs. Curtin, I always called in future the final curtain. But anyway, this woman put us up. We were staying in the attic on bunk beds, and there was a girl from Liverpool staying in a bunk bed above. But anyway, we left this morning, Tuesday morning I think it was, to go down the street for a walk in Listowel. And we met Felix and the Stork one coming with the 2 machine guns under their arms, their 2 fiddles, black suits and fiddles under their arms. So we stopped with them and I says, Philly, where are you heading for? He says, the man up here, he told us last night he would let us in at 9:30. And I says, right, are you coming with us? He says, I says, I will go in for a while anyway. Lovely sunny morning. Carol, my girlfriend, wanted to go to Ballybunion Beach and I didn't. So we went into the back of this place anyway, into an entry, this man sweeping the floor. And we sat down and the guys was 2 powers and 2 bottles of Smithwick each, and I had a half pint of Guinness or something. And we sat down, and after a while, when the cobwebs were gone, the fiddles were produced and the 2 guys started to play. And the next thing, there was another few people trickled in, and then the next 2 who arrived in and sat down at the same table was Sean Keane of the Chieftains and his wife. And within an hour you couldn't have went to the toilet or your seat would have been gone. And Ballybunion was out the window, so that was the end of the beach. We were there till mid-afternoon or late afternoon. One of the best sessions out of absolutely nothing.
He was a great man, Felix. Also, I remember his sons, Brendan and Desi, playing trad music as well.
They did. Brendan was a very good fiddler. Desi played the box, yeah.
Key box.
Feely,
I also remember, sorry, Kiro had.
Feely also had a thing that happened. Well, every fla that I knew of that he was at, and indeed some other local sort of drone flas and things, he invariably lost his wallet at the flas for one reason or another, and sometimes retrieved, sometimes not. So, and it would have been full of all his holiday money, for he kept his holiday money to the fla, so. But no, sorry, Tom, interrupted. You gone ahead there?
No, I was going to say that I remember Felix particularly. He had the patience of a saint, because everyone in Omagh remembers Felix for playing at the Fish.
He did indeed. Oh.
And he must have played the high call cap and all those dances, the hurling boys and the. Mm-hmm. He must have played them ad nauseum for days upon days.
And as you know, they had to be at the right tempo.
Absolutely,
they had to be the same. There was no sort of there couldn't be one played better than the other.
Aye.
They had to be played the same. And he wasn't paid. He wasn't paid half of what he should have been
worth,
getting.
Absolutely not. Of course he wasn't.
He was. I know he was. At the end of it, he was given a meal in the Royal Arms, which he made up for by what he hadn't been paid, by refreshments and food. It ended up that we at one stage, when I was sort of playing the guitar middling well, we were Philly asked me to go and accompany him and Stork one in a wee group. We used to play in a wee bar, the Poets Bar in Fintona. We used to play in, and we played a few things about Omagh as well. But I came up with the name Kirkquinlan, and Philly says, "No, we'll just go the Stork and me and you." And that was it. That was the end of my invention of names for bands.
What was your suggestion again?
Kirkquinlan.
I love it.
It was.
He says the Stork and you and me and you.
The Stork and you and me. Let's say he was blunt.
He was brilliant.
And
he also, he played the fiddle. He had a sort of a disability, as I recall him. Was his index finger, wasn't it?
I had a wee bit missing, obviously.
But he had to compensate for that by.
Of course,
it must have been very difficult for him, but he did it very well.
He was a very nice, very, very nice fiddle. What I forgot to tell you was about that meeting with Sean Keane in Listowel. After part of the session, about playing for an hour or so, Feely put down the fiddle on the table, or into the fiddle case on the table, as did the Stork. And Sean Keane says, "What's wrong, boys?" And Feely says, "You're starting to play tunes that we don't know, Sean." And Sean says, "Oh, we'll have to rectify that. We'll play ones you do know."
For goodness
sake. And the last time I told that story was at Artie's funeral. when Sean Keane came over to shake hands with me, and I told him the story, and he says, "Well, wasn't that just the right thing to do, sure?" Absolute gentleman.
And wasn't it just as well?
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, the Pride of Erin, as I remember it now, do you remember who was in the band? I remember some of them.
I wouldn't remember the Nugents
That's my next question. I nearly forgot. I wanted to clarify out my own mind. Are they related to the Kearneys?
They are.
What way, Kieran?
Nugent.
Packy and Sean.
Packy and Sean Nugent would have been sons of, as far as I can make out, would have been sons of a sister of Grandis. Mrs. Nugent would have been Kearney.
Your grandfather's sister?
Yeah, my grandfather's sister would have been married to a man called Nugent.
So they would have been, I suppose, first cousins really of
first
Arthur,
cousins.
and the girls.
Yeah. I mean, what do you call her? You know who sings at the minute? She's living in Catherine Nugent.
Catherine Margaret and Rosemary. Is that
Catherine would be related to us. Yeah, of course.
Right, not amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
She would be related to us. She used to go into Artie's sessions in Miles McCann's bar in John Street.
Oh, of course, absolutely right. From the little shop there.
Yeah, they have a shop down on the road to Dewish.
That's right.
They have the petrol pump and the shop
singer,
there. Yeah. Good traditional singer, yeah.
She is, Well, look, our time is marching on here. We have so much to talk about and so many songs to play. Time for another song. Kieran, I think, if your grandfather was to be remembered for one song nationally or even internationally with singers, it would probably be The Hills Above Drumquin.
Oh, I think definitely, yeah.
Can you tell us about the song itself?
The song, The Hills Above Drumquin, I think would be the one that everybody associates. It's the one that would be most famous as far as people knowing, across Ireland and as you say, further afield. But again, there'd be a lot of people wouldn't know where it came from. It was written, I'm not sure exactly at what stage of his life it was written, but it's again the sort of yearning for the place names in Tyrone, the beauty of the winds and the gorse and the heather and the townlands. There was when the winds across Drumbarley.
Oh, beautiful.
The winds across Drumbarley make the fields a yellow blaze. Now
what
there was
line. What a line!
What a line! I mean, there was one about 3 years ago. Myself and my wife decided to take a run down around Drumquin, and we decided just on the road, on the Omagh Road, there's a sign for Drumbarley. So I said, Carol, we'll turn in here, look. I want to just see, because it was a summertime. And I thought, we'll go in here and we'll see. And we rounded this bend in the townland of Drumbarley, and there were the hunts. Fields full of them. There wasn't just a hedge of hunts. It was fields full of hunts. And it was absolutely just a yellow blaze, perfect.
The song could just said it perfectly.
Absolutely, yeah.
For goodness
perfectly.
Sake. Well, this is Kieran McGlinn, the grandson of the great Felix Kearney. The Hills Above Drumquin.
God bless the hills of Donegal, I've heard their praises sung. In days long gone beyond recall, when I was very young, then I would pray to see a day before life's course be run, when I could sing the praises of the hills above Drumquin. I love the hills of Dewich, be they heather-clad or lea, the wooded lands of Cool and the fort at Dunaree, the green-clad slopes of Kirlish as they meet the setting sun, descending in its glory on the hills above Drumquin. Drumquin, you're not a city, but you're all the world to me. Your lot I'll never pity, should you never greater be. For I love you as I knew you when from school I used to run on my homeward journey through you to the hills above Drumquin. When the winds across Drumbarley make the fields a yellow blaze, when the heather turns to purple on my native Dressig braes, when the sandstone rocks of Claramore are glistening in the sun, then nature's at her grandest on the hills above Drumquin. I've seen the Scottish Highlands, they have beauty wild and grand. I've journeyed in the lowlands, 'tis a cold and cheerless land, but I always toil content, for when each hard day's work was done, my heart went back at sunset to the hills above Drumquin. This world is sad and dreary, and the tasks of life are sore. My feet are growing weary, I might never wander more. But I want to rest in Langfield when the sands of life are run, in the sheltering shades of Duvish and the hills above Drumquin.
Kieran, we're getting towards the end of our time together here. Can I ask you, what inspired you to record the album with your grandfather's songs at the time you did? I mean, why not years ago, or did something inspire you at the time?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a number of reasons. First of all, I thought that there was better ones in the family to do it than me. I thought that maybe there wasn't enough songs rather than poems to make up an album. I thought, who would want me to be doing it? But my sister Anne McElroy, who you know, Tom, she says, well, why wouldn't you do it? Sure, you're as good doing it as anybody else. Oh. And if there's no airs to the songs, sure, can't you make up airs yourself? You're not stupid, like. So I thought about it, and I thought, I'll put down that. I know that. Well, there's a couple of them I didn't know the airs of. The Misty Hills of Home is one example. I didn't know the air of that, but I got it from Rita Haynes. And I put the air to Song for Alice Mulligan myself. I did the air to The Rainy Day myself. And eventually, I think it's 12 that's on the album. Is it 12?
I think it's 12, yeah.
There is 12, yeah. And then I thought, what'll I do with it now? And I hadn't a notion like about how you go about making a record or anything else. And my son again, Matthew, says, Dad, why did you get in touch with him and make it home? His wee studio out the back of his house in Killyclahar. And eventually I got up the nerve to ask Eamon, would he be interested in recording this or helping me to, and he says, of course. He was playing at the time with Solus, which was, as you know, as an Irish-American band.
They were a huge act in America.
Huge band in America. And when he wasn't on tour, he would give me a ring and say, do you want to do a couple of numbers today? And I'd go around and he'd be into the garage and he'd do a couple of numbers. And then would go back and he'd be on tour for a while, get back again, we'd do another couple. And eventually we had them. And he did the mix. He did the whole thing. And I mean, you know him. And as everybody was saying, he's an absolute gentleman.
Absolutely.
Absolute gentleman. So he says, I says, Eamon, how much do I owe you for your studio time and your time you've spent on them when I wasn't even here, and so on and so forth, and adding keyboards and adding the cello and doing this and that and the other. And this particular day, Artie was there. Artie at that in the hills above the Drumquin. Artie put on guitar. Mm-hmm. So Artie says, why didn't you just go halfers in the seals? And I thought, well, that's Eamon says, no bother, that's grand. You know, I mean, he didn't even get paid for studio time.
Isn't that amazing?
And
What a decent fellow.
So anything we got for anything that I got coming in for Misty Hills of Home, half went to Eamon, you know.
Well, I think in all fairness as well, Eamon's a very bright fellow. I think maybe he understood that this was just more than a commercial proposition. This was something being put on record for all time, which had to be done, and which had never been done before.
Yeah, well, I had the reason I did it was so that the melodies and the words wouldn't be lost totally. Like, so
That's
I thought
brilliant.
I'll put down this for a record, so that it'll be at least there'll be some of the copies of this thing lying about. As it transpired, there's about 200 of them in my attic lying about. But there's. It was to have a record, Tom. That was the main reason.
Well, look, let me just tell the people listening here. I mean, I cannot recommend this highly enough. When it first came out, I reviewed it for a couple of papers, and I meant every word I said. I think it's brilliant. I think it's.
Well, they were absolutely very generous.
No.
Reviews.
But I don't blow smoke. There is some ingredient X about that album. That can't be manufactured. It's just there. I think maybe you're singing.
I don't know.
What I do, but I do think it. And here you play the nylon guitar yourself in that record.
I play the nylon guitar.
Beautiful.
Nylon guitar.
Yeah.
I play sort of a fingerstyle on the nylon guitar, and I don't know. I don't know how to do it. I don't know what to do.
Question it.
No, but I remember. People. I used to teach guitar for a while, just for raw beginners. But I remember people asking me about how do you learn to play fingerstyle guitar, and I learned to play fingerstyle guitar. I was sitting on the arm of an armchair in Cannondale when I was about 19 or 20, maybe a bit more. It was the time when there were black and white TV, and the folk program on black and white TV that I watched was Robin Hall and Jimmy McGregor. And I watched this guy, and I could see his left hand playing the guitar, and I knew the chords you were playing. They were playing simple chords, C, D, G seventh, A, A minor, whatever. And I thought, but how's that sound? And then I showed you his right hand plucking the strings, and then I thought to myself, well, listen, if you can play a chord and it sounds right when you strum all 6 strings, surely it sounds all right if you hit the strings individually. So, I thought, I'll try this. And the next thing I thought, right, I'll go to the bass string every so often to keep the rhythm right. And the next thing I was playing some sort of style of fingerstyle guitar, but I don't think it's ever been taught.
Well, I'll tell you something. You must have been highly thought of as a guitar player. I'll tell you why. You mightn't even remember this, but back, it must have been 1961 or 1962, there used to be a program on what the BBC then called the Home Service.
Yeah.
It's now called Radio Ulster.
Yeah.
And the program was a program of folk music from a different town each week, and it was called Listen Here a While to Me.
Yes.
And the presenter was a man called Jack McGay.
Yeah.
But the producer was a man called Maurice Leach, who went on to become a phenomenally successful novelist.
Yes.
And they came to our house and they asked my brother Jimmy and I if we would go on and sing a couple of songs, I guess. And we said sure. And they said, we've got a great man to play the guitar with you. And his name was Kieran McGlinn. And we recorded it at Knocknamoe Castle.
Yeah.
And our uncle Jack Bacon was on the same show playing the pipes, and the Liverpool Spinners. They were on as well, and you were playing the guitar. Now, there's a memory you can't remember it,
I
can
can't
you?
remember
Well,
it,
I
no.
remember it vividly, and that was your guitar style went ahead of you. So there you are. Listen, I think there aren't enough songs, you were saying, for probably a volume 2, no?
No, I'll have to start.
The bag is shook out.
I'll have to start making up more airs. And there's some of them. There's one or two that I thought about, but some of the rhythms in the poems are quite complicated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some of them are a bit complicated, but no, there's nothing in the pipeline at the minute. And I'm getting a bit long in the tooth for a new venture like that anyway.
Well, I don't believe that. Paul McCartney did Glastonbury at the age of 81 or something.
Yeah.
You know.
Did you hear it?
I did.
So did I. Yeah. Enough said.
Kieran, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Well,
And
thank you very much.
I think we can't finish off because people who don't know the programme or don't know you or I will certainly know the name McGlinn internationally from your brother Artie.
Yeah.
And his huge influence on Celtic guitar playing all across the world, and he really is an international influence in guitar playing.
Yeah.
How do the family feel about Artie's success? Even though now he's passed away, God have mercy on him.
Yeah.
Must have been great pride for you all.
Well, I mean, I don't think we realised. My father certainly didn't realise just how big a star he was, you know, and he didn't blow his load, Artie. You know, he was always. I mean, when he played in show bands, he was noted for standing behind the speakers. Yeah. He stayed out of sight, but they used to in the Plattermen. They used to rehearse in the Foresters Hall in Omagh. And he would drag me along with him down to rehearsal. I'd be sitting in this empty hall, and they'd be on the stage, and they'd be doing these rock and roll songs and stuff. And Ray Moore was in charge of the brass. Artie was in charge of guitar and drums and so on. And I remember the big singer Speedy Hamilton was playing bass guitar. And Speedy was a massive big fella, and Artie was this wee puny guy. And I remember Artie wrote out his bass parts for him, and Sean would stand and he'd read this, you know, A B B A, just whatever Artie wrote, and he would play it. But you see, if he made a mistake, I mean, I used to get so embarrassed because Artie would eat the head of him, like for, you know, what are you doing?
Perfectionist.
What are you doing? He taught me to play bass guitar. No, he didn't. He tried to show me how to play bass guitar up in Cannondale, and he thought he always was into jazz, long before in Irish music. So he decided that he'd show me the bass line for Blue Moon, which, if you think, is quite a simple song. But you see, Blue Moon, the bass line that he worked out for it, it's not simple by any. And he taught me this bass line. He brought in Speedy Hamilton's bass guitar from the bandwagon and tuned it in. And he said, right, we'll have a go at it now. So he counted it in, and he was playing the chords and I was playing the bass line. And then he decided to start playing melody. And I started... I stopped looking at the notes, the bass line that he had written for me, and started listening to him playing melody and starting to do all this, you know, just free flowing stuff, and I totally lost the bass line. And his way of saying he wasn't happy with a rehearsal or anything was he banged the 6 strings open as hard as he could with the pick. And that was the end of that particular tune. And that was the end of the lessons for me as well. He says, you'll never learn to play the bass guitar. One tune which didn't work, and that was the end.
That was your bass career.
It was very, very... But I mean, I must admit that I think it was really coming towards the end of his career that we began to realise just how good he was, you know. And I mean... how appreciated he was when you hear about. I think we got an inkling when Van Morrison contacted him. Yeah. Van Morrison contacted my mother, God rest her, was babysitting for Artie when he was away on tour from Omagh, and the phone rang, and she answered the phone in the house, and this man says, "Hello, I'm looking for Artie McGlinn," and she says, "This is his mother here." And she says, "Who is it?" Yes, and this is Van Morrison. Right, I'll tell him you're wrong. Hung up. So Artie came home and he says, some boy called Van Morrison was looking for you. He's supposed to give him a ring. And he played at least one LP with Van Morrison. And there's a couple of things on YouTube of a couple of items of him playing with Van Morrison, and I can't remember. One of the tunes, he has a particularly nice solo one, but he's played with what do you call the country guy, Tom? That he did. I'll forget his name now. Anyway, can't remember.
I can't recall myself.
No, he lived in Donegal for a while.
Oh, John Prine.
John Prine.
Of course.
He did a couple of things with him. A couple of lovely solos. And remember him telling me, he says, you see that solo there? He says, I did that in one take. It just took me one take to do that. And John Prine says, that'll do. That's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
well, he's certainly, he's a big credit to this town.
Oh, he is.
And when I go abroad myself to perform, you're from Omagh. Oh, Artie McGlinn is the first thing they say. So we're very proud of him as well. Kieran, just to remind people, you have those 200 CDs sitting in your attic. I'm sure a lot of people would love to get a copy. At least on my recommendation, it's quite superb. How do they do that?
Well, they can do it by contacting me. They can do it by, my son has a guitar studio in Omagh Town.
Does Matt have a website? Or
He has a website.
You know what
I obviously don't.
Well, I'll tell you, Donald will get the website and be able to. Have we got it here, have we? I think we do have it here. Just for people who want to pick up Kieran's album, The Misty Hills of Home, you can call Matt at his studio 0756 00 1296. That's Matt McGlinn. 0756 00 1296. And between Matt and his dad, they'll be able to get you a copy of that CD. Are they a tenner each? Is that what it is?
Tenner each.
Tenner each. So please, I recommend it very highly. And just to finish off, Kieran, we're going to do this great night of the traditional and folk music about Omagh on September the 30th. You'll be on stage. What do you think you're going to do that night? You got any idea?
I think just because of Eamon's playing on it, I'll do Dancing in Glenrowan.
Beautiful.
I think because you mentioned it as one of the ones you like, Whispering River Stroll, and I'll do Misty Hills of Home simply because it's the title track of the CD, and if I get away with 3, that'll be grand. If there's more applause.
It'll have to be the encore.
I'll do another one, but God only knows. I don't know. There's a few. There's one called The Mill, which I particularly like.
Good.
It's just about him going back to the mill in Glenfern.
It was about the music of the mill, isn't it?
The music
Beautiful.
of the mill. Some people like the lark in the morning,
That's
but give
right.
me the old wheel of turning. So
beautiful.
So
there you have it, folks. We'd like to thank Don McGurgan. Don's been doing the sound here for us. This is Tom Sweeney here, standing in for Mr. Ford and Mr. McGurgan this evening. And it's been a great honour to spend the last hour in the company of Kieran McGlinn. And we're going to play out this evening with Kieran McGlinn, the grandson of Felix Kearney. And the title track of the album is called The Misty Hills of Home. So from Kieran, myself and Don, take the journey, sweet. Good night. God bless.
Far away from home and kindred, in a city great and grand, once again my thoughts have wandered to my own dear native land, where the flowers are of the rarest. 'Tis there I mean to roam, and the heather blooms the fairest on the hills of home, ever with the shadows falling, happy memories come. In my dreams I hear you calling, misty hills of home. Winter nights are long and dreary, time hangs heavy on my hands. I have read till I am weary wondrous tales of distant lands, when great writers praise their sire land, England, France or Rome. Then I breathe a prayer for Ireland and the hills of home. happy memories come. In my dreams I hear you calling, misty hills of home. Only those who know the longing of an exile's heart can tell how fond memories come thronging of the place I love so well. Glens of bracken, gorse and rushes, far across the foam, dark Tyrone among the bushes, and the hills of home, ever with the shadows falling, happy memories come. In my dreams I hear you calling, misty hills of home. Now the summer sun is shining, seasons too, they come and go. Oft I'll watch its light declining, sinking in a golden glow. I've no time for vain regretting, still my thoughts will roam. Ah, to see that red sun setting on the hills of home, ever with the shadows falling, happy memories come. In my dreams I hear you calling, misty hills of home, misty hills of
many's a gay night, from dark till daylight, I spend with people of high renown. But in all their grandeur and heaps to squander, my heart would wander for Sweet Omagh Town.